All right, this title has strong curiosity, but it also carries a big problem. The idea that holding a fixed amount like 2000 XRP makes you elite and that Swift ending was planned is exactly the kind of claim that gets views but can destroy credibility if you don't handle it carefully. There's no verified evidence that Swift is being ended, and exaggerating that will make smart viewers click off. So I'm going to keep the hook strong, but I'll ground it in logic so your audience trusts you instead of just getting hyped. The truth about XRP right now is something most people are completely missing. And if you're watching this, you might be closer than you think to a position that could change everything for you, but only if you actually understand what's going on behind the scenes and stop following the noise that's being pushed all over social media. Because right now, there is a very specific narrative being built around XRP, and it's not random, it's not accidental, and it's definitely not as simple as people are making it look. You've probably heard people say that holding just 2000 XRP could make you part of a small group of holders who benefit the most if things play out in a certain way. And at the same time, you're hearing claims that the entire global banking system is about to shift away from Swift and move toward blockchain based solutions, and that XRP is somehow sitting right at the center of that shift. But here's where you need to slow down and actually think. Because if you just accept these ideas without understanding the mechanics, you're setting yourself up to either overestimate the opportunity or completely misunderstand the risk. When people talk about being elite with 2000 XRP, what they're really doing is trying to simplify a much more complex situation into a number that feels achievable because psychologically it hooks you. It makes you feel like you're close to something big. But the reality is that markets don't reward fixed numbers, they reward positioning, timing, and adoption. If XRP were to reach extremely high valuations, yes, holding thousands of tokens would matter, but that outcome depends on multiple layers of adoption, including institutional usage, regulatory clarity, and real transaction demand, not just hype or speculation. And this is where most content goes wrong because it skips the hard part and jumps straight to the fantasy outcome. Now, when it comes to Swift, you need to understand what it actually is before you buy into the idea that it's ending. Swift is not a payment system. It's a messaging network used by banks to communicate transaction details, and it has been deeply integrated into global finance for decades. Replacing something like that is not a flip of a switch. It's a gradual process that involves coordination between thousands of financial institutions, regulators, and governments. So when someone tells you that its end was planned, you should immediately question what that actually means because there's a huge difference between evolution and replacement. Blockchain technology, including solutions connected to XRP, can improve cross border payments, especially in terms of speed and cost. But improvement does not automatically mean total replacement. What's actually happening is more subtle and more important. Financial institutions are experimenting with multiple technologies at the same time, including blockchain, digital currencies, and upgraded versions of existing systems. Ripple, the company behind XRP's main use case, has been working on partnerships with banks and payment providers, focusing on cross border liquidity solutions. This is real progress, but it's not a guaranteed takeover of the global financial system. And if you understand that difference, you're already ahead of most people watching content in this space. So the real question is not whether holding 2000 XRP makes you elite or whether Swift is ending overnight. The real question is whether XRP can carve out a meaningful role in the future of global payments and whether that role is big enough to justify the expectations being built around it. And that's exactly what we're going to break down step by step because if you get this wrong, you're either going to miss an opportunity or get caught in unrealistic expectations that never play out. Now, if you really want to understand whether XRP has a realistic path to massive growth, you need to stop thinking in terms of hype phrases like elite holders and start looking at how money actually moves across the world. Because this is where most people completely lose the plot and start believing things that sound exciting but don't hold up under basic scrutiny. The global financial system is not built on one single network that can just be replaced overnight. It's a layered system where different technologies handle different parts of the process. And unless XRP proves it can outperform those layers in a meaningful way, it doesn't matter how many tokens you hold, the outcome will not match the expectations being pushed online. To break this down properly, you need to look at what Ripple is actually trying to do with XRP, because XRP itself is not designed to replace banks or eliminate existing infrastructure. It is designed to act as a bridge asset for liquidity, meaning it helps move value between different currencies quickly without needing pre funded accounts sitting idle in multiple countries. That sounds powerful on the surface, and it is, but only if institutions actually adopt it at scale. And that's the part people skip over because it's slower, more complicated, and far less exciting than saying this will replace everything. Here's the reality you need to face. Banks are extremely conservative when it comes to changing infrastructure because they are dealing with trillions of dollars, strict regulations, and massive operational risks. So even if a solution is faster or cheaper, that does not guarantee adoption. It just makes it a candidate. For XRP to reach the kind of valuation people are dreaming about, it would need consistent high volume usage from financial institutions, not just partnerships announced in press releases, but real ongoing transaction flow that creates demand for the asset itself. Without that demand, price speculation becomes disconnected from utility, and that's where people get burned. Now, let's address the idea that a small amount like 2000 XRP could put you in a rare position. On paper, it sounds attractive because it gives you a clear target, but you need to ask a basic question that most people ignore, which is why would a specific number suddenly become elite in a market that is global and constantly changing? The truth is that number is arbitrary. It's based more on social media narratives than on any financial model or institutional requirement. What actually matters is your exposure relative to the asset's performance and your ability to manage risk, not hitting a specific token count that someone on the internet decided sounds impressive. At the same time, there is a psychological trick being played here. When people hear that a relatively small amount could lead to massive gains, they lower their guard, they stop questioning assumptions, and they start focusing only on upside scenarios. That is exactly how unrealistic expectations spread. And it's why you see cycles of hype followed by disappointment in the crypto space over and over again. If you want to be ahead of that cycle, you need to stay grounded in what is actually happening, not what sounds good in a title. Now, coming back to the idea of Swift being replaced, this is where things get even more distorted. Swift has already been evolving, integrating new standards like ISO 2022, improving speed and transparency, and working alongside other financial technologies rather than ignoring them. This means the future is not a simple old system dies, new system takes over scenario. It is far more likely to be a hybrid environment where multiple systems coexist and interact. In that kind of world, XRP doesn't need to replace Swift to succeed, but it also doesn't automatically dominate just because it exists. And this is the point where you need to make a decision about how you approach this market. You can either follow narratives that simplify everything into extreme outcomes, or you can understand the mechanics, accept the uncertainty, and position yourself based on realistic scenarios. Because if XRP does grow, it will not be because of a sudden switch where Swift disappears. It will be because of gradual adoption, increasing utility, and a shift in how liquidity is managed globally. That process takes time, and more importantly, it requires proof, not just speculation. Now, this is where things start getting uncomfortable. Because if you strip away the hype and actually look at what needs to happen for XRP to reach the kind of valuations people are throwing around, you quickly realize that the gap between expectation and reality is massive, and most people are not prepared to deal with that honestly. Everyone loves to talk about price targets like $10, $100, or even higher, but almost no one sits down and asks what level of capital, usage, and global integration would actually be required to justify those numbers. And without that understanding, you're not investing, you're just hoping. Let's get very direct here. For XRP to reach extreme price levels, it would need a level of demand that goes far beyond retail investors buying and holding, because retail money alone does not have the power to sustain those valuations over time. What you would need is consistent institutional usage, meaning banks, payment providers, and financial networks are actively using XRP as part of their daily operations, creating continuous buy pressure driven by utility, not speculation. And that brings you right back to Ripple, because the company's entire strategy is built around convincing institutions that using XRP for liquidity is more efficient than traditional methods. But here's the part people don't like to hear. Even if Ripple succeeds in expanding its network, that does not automatically translate into explosive price movement, because the way XRP is used in transactions is not the same as people holding it long term waiting for appreciation. In many cases, XRP can be used as a bridge asset where it is bought, transferred, and sold within seconds, which means the same pool of liquidity can be reused multiple times. That's efficient for the system, but it also means that high transaction volume does not always equal a massive increase in price. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings in the XRP community, and ignoring it leads to completely unrealistic expectations. At the same time, you need to factor in regulation, because no matter how strong the technology is, it cannot scale globally without clear legal frameworks. The ongoing discussions and past legal battles around XRP have already shown how much uncertainty can slow down adoption. And while progress has been made, the environment is still evolving. Governments and regulators are not going to hand over critical parts of the financial system to a technology without strict oversight, and that process takes years, not months. So when you hear people talk about sudden explosive changes, you should immediately question the timeline they are assuming. Now let's circle back to the elite holder narrative, because this is where a lot of people get trapped without realizing it. The idea sounds simple: hold a certain amount, wait for a massive price increase, and you're set. But that completely ignores market dynamics like liquidity, sell pressure, and distribution. If XRP were to reach a point where early holders are sitting on massive gains, many of them will sell, and that creates resistance in the market. Prices don't just go up in a straight line, especially not in an asset that is widely held and actively traded. There's also another angle that most people overlook, and that is competition. XRP is not the only project targeting cross border payments. There are other blockchain solutions, as well as improvements being made within traditional systems, and they are all competing for the same space. Even Swift is not standing still. It is actively upgrading its infrastructure and exploring integrations with digital assets. So the idea that XRP has a clear, uncontested path to dominance is simply not accurate. What you should be focusing on instead is probability, not possibility. Yes, it is possible for XRP to play a major role in the future of finance, but the probability of extreme outcomes depends on multiple conditions being met at the same time, including adoption, regulation, competition, and market behavior. If even one of those factors falls short, the outcome changes significantly. That doesn't mean XRP has no potential. It means you need to approach it with a level of realism that most people avoid. Because at the end of the day, the difference between people who benefit from markets like this and those who get burned is not luck, it's clarity. If you understand what needs to happen and how likely it is, you can position yourself intelligently. But if you base your decisions on simplified narratives and fixed numbers, you're not in control. You're just reacting to whatever story is trending at the time. And that's a dangerous place to be in a market that moves as fast and as unpredictably as crypto. Now, here's the part most people avoid completely, because it forces you to confront something uncomfortable, and that is timing. Everyone talks about how high XRP can go, but almost nobody talks about when and under what exact conditions that kind of move could realistically happen. And this is where a lot of holders get trapped for years, holding on to an idea that might be valid long term, but completely misaligned with the actual timeline of the market. If you think XRP is just going to suddenly explode because of one announcement or one partnership, you're misunderstanding how large financial systems evolve. Real change at the level people are talking about happens slowly, layer by layer, and often quietly before it becomes visible to the public. Even if Ripple continues to expand its network and improve its technology, that progress has to translate into measurable, consistent usage before it has any sustainable impact on price. And that translation phase is where most of the delay happens because institutions test, evaluate, and gradually integrate new systems instead of flipping a switch overnight. Now, let's be very direct about something else that most XRP content avoids, and that is opportunity cost. While you are holding XRP waiting for a specific long term outcome, other parts of the crypto market and even traditional markets are moving, creating gains, losses, and new opportunities. If your entire strategy is built around one asset reaching an extreme valuation, you are concentrating your risk in a way that can backfire badly if the timeline stretches longer than expected or the outcome is smaller than you imagined. This doesn't mean XRP is a bad investment. It means putting all your expectations into one scenario is a weak strategy. Another point you need to understand is liquidity dynamics during a major price move. Let's say XRP does start climbing significantly. What do you think happens next? Early holders take profits, large wallets rebalance, and new buyers hesitate as the price increases. This creates volatility, not a smooth upward trend. The idea that price will just keep rising without resistance is not how markets behave, especially not in crypto where sentiment can shift quickly. So, even in a bullish scenario, execution matters, meaning when you enter, when you take profits, and how you manage your position becomes just as important as the asset you are holding. Now, coming back to the narrative around global financial change, this is where you need to separate what is possible from what is likely. Yes, blockchain technology is pushing the industry forward, and yes, solutions connected to XRP could play a role in improving cross border payments, but that role exists alongside other innovations, not in isolation. Swift is not disappearing, it is adapting, and other competitors are also building solutions that target the same inefficiencies. So the future is not a single winner scenario, it is a competitive environment where multiple systems coexist and evolve. And here's the hard truth most people don't want to accept. Even if XRP becomes successful, it does not guarantee life changing wealth for every holder. The outcome depends on how much you hold, when you bought, how long you hold, and how you react during market cycles. Someone who bought early and manages their position wisely can see strong returns, while someone who buys late, holds blindly, and ignores market signals can miss out even if the asset performs well overall. So when you hear claims about being elite with a certain number of tokens, or about massive system wide changes that will instantly drive prices to extreme levels, you need to pause and ask whether the timeline, the mechanics, and the incentives actually make sense. Because if they don't, then you're not looking at analysis, you're looking at a narrative designed to keep you emotionally invested rather than strategically positioned. And this is where discipline separates serious participants from everyone else. It's not about believing the most exciting story, it's about understanding the process, accepting uncertainty, and making decisions based on probability instead of hype. If you can do that, you put yourself in a position to benefit whether XRP reaches moderate success or something bigger. But if you ignore these factors and rely only on extreme expectations, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, no matter how strong the narrative sounds on the surface. Now, after breaking all of this down, you're left with a much clearer picture. And it's probably not as simple or as exciting as the headlines make it sound, but it's real. And that's what actually matters if you're serious about making money instead of just chasing hype. The idea that holding a fixed amount like 2000 XRP automatically puts you in some elite category is not based on any real financial model. It's based on psychology because people are naturally drawn to clear targets that feel achievable. But markets don't care about clean numbers, they care about demand, liquidity, and utility. If XRP succeeds, it will be because it solves real problems at scale, not because a specific group of holders reached a certain number. At the same time, the narrative around Swift being ended is something you need to completely rethink. What's actually happening in the financial world is evolution, not destruction. Systems are being upgraded, new technologies are being tested, and institutions are exploring multiple solutions at once. That includes blockchain, digital assets, and improvements to existing infrastructure. XRP through Ripple is part of that conversation, but it is not the only player, and it is not guaranteed to dominate the outcome. If you understand that, you avoid one of the biggest traps in this space, which is believing that one asset will take over everything. Now, here's the part where you need to be brutally honest with yourself. Why are you holding XRP? Is it because you've actually looked at the fundamentals, the adoption progress, the regulatory situation, and the competition? Or is it because you've been influenced by bold claims and high price predictions that sound too good to ignore? There's nothing wrong with being bullish, but there is something very wrong with being blindly optimistic in a market that has proven over and over again that it punishes that kind of thinking. If XRP continues to grow, if institutional adoption increases, and if regulatory clarity improves globally, then yes, there is a strong case for long term value. But that growth will likely be uneven, filled with delays, corrections, and periods where nothing seems to happen. That's the reality of markets tied to large scale infrastructure changes. So, your strategy cannot be based on a single outcome or a fixed timeline. It has to be flexible, it has to account for uncertainty, and it has to include risk management. Otherwise, you're just hoping things work out instead of positioning yourself intelligently. Another thing you cannot ignore is your exit strategy. Everyone talks about buying and holding, but almost nobody talks about when to take profits, how to scale out, or how to protect gains during volatile periods. If XRP does move significantly, the people who benefit the most will not be the ones who just hold forever. They will be the ones who understand market cycles and act accordingly. That requires discipline, not emotion, and it requires planning before the move happens, not during it. So instead of asking whether holding 2000 XRP makes you elite, you should be asking whether your overall strategy actually makes sense. Are you diversified? Are you prepared for different outcomes? And do you understand the risks as well as the potential rewards? Because those are the questions that separate people who grow their capital from those who get caught in endless cycles of hype and disappointment. At the end of the day, XRP is an opportunity, not a guarantee. It has real potential, but that potential depends on factors that are still developing. And until those factors are proven at scale, everything else is speculation. If you approach it with that mindset, you stay grounded, you make better decisions, and you avoid the kind of thinking that leads to costly mistakes. And before you go, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments because I want to know where you stand on this. Are you holding XRP for the long term, or are you waiting for a specific price target to exit? And more importantly, what's your actual strategy behind it? Just remember, none of this is financial advice. This is only for educational and informational purposes. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions, and never invest more than you can afford to lose because markets like this can move fast and unpredictably.